Yo, what's going on, Headliner Nation? We're continuing our way too early 2021 rankings by diving into the tight end position now. If you've missed the other videos, quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers, they've already dropped. They're right here. So when you get done with the tight end video, if you haven't seen those yet, make sure that you head back and check those out. But for now, we got to talk about my favorite thing in the whole world, tight ends. And yes, we're talking about the football kind right now. So let's go ahead and jump into it and check it out and see who is going to be in my top 20 tight ends way too early here in the offseason. Before I do that, though, don't forget a couple of other things. If you love the content here and we've helped you win some fantasy football contests in the past, then you can also get a little extra help by pre-ordering our draft guide at thefantasyheadliners.com or joining us over on Patreon. Both links down in the description of the video below. You can join for as little as $5 a month on Patreon, get tons of extra content, tons of extra articles, tons of rankings that you can't see here in video. So consider it if you're looking to take your fantasy football game to the next level. Let's go ahead and jump into it now and talk about the tight ends. Starting at number 20, Zach Ertz. Now, really the only reason that Zach Ertz is so low right now is because I don't know where he's going to be next year. There was talk that Zach Ertz potentially could be done in Philadelphia at the end of the season. It would make some sense. They have, I mean, here's the thing. They have Dallas Goedert already. You're going to see his name pop up here in a few minutes. But do they really need Zach Ertz? Does it end up helping the cap as if they move on? Like, what specifically do they think he could do if for some reason they decide to do a little turnover? Me personally, I hold on to him. Run a lot more two tight end sets with Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz. They might be two of your best weapons until Jalen Reagor really starts to break into his own. So for right now, me personally, I don't want to see him do anything with Zach Ertz, but there was talk that they would be moving on from him. At number 19, Tyler Higby. Now, Tyler Higby will probably end up going a little bit higher as well, now that we know Matthew Stafford is out there in L.A. But keep in mind, too, it takes a little bit of time to kind of develop that connection. Yeah, TJ Hawkinson had a good season this past season, but his rookie year, wasn't that great. Was it because that he was, building up to getting better like a lot of tight ends do? Was it because Stafford doesn't necessarily look at his tight ends a whole lot? I mean, he had Eric Ebron for several years, didn't really do a whole lot of fantasy output there. So what will it be? Me personally, I'm going to lean towards Tyler Higby having a bounce back year and being closer to what he was in 2019, especially considering Gerald Everett could end up being gone. Eric Ebron at number 18. Eric Ebron is really going to depend on Ben Roethlisberger for me. Now, here's the thing with Eric Ebron. Towards the end of the season, he was really helping some teams out. But again, it's kind of that roller coaster with him. Ended up having 85 targets, only ended up catching 56 balls though. The same as Hayden Hurst. And really, he had less yards than Hayden Hurst. And he had less receiving touchdowns than Hayden Hurst. But we never considered Hayden Hurst to be like a guy that we were like considering strongly as a play every single week last year, except for towards the beginning of the week. So me personally, Eric Ebron, it could end up helping him this year if Juju Smith-Schuster moves on. Does Big Ben end up coming back? There's still some things that are fluctuating there. His 9.96 yards per reception, though, I'd like to see that climb up a little bit. His 3.41 yards after the catch per reception, one of the lowest in the league at the tight end position for guys that had more than 60 targets. So would like to see some things creep up a little bit. Those are all things that can be worked on, though. Austin Hooper at number 17, definitely looking for a little bit more for him in year 2. But this is a running football team, and they'll get OBJ back next year if they don't decide to trade him. So Austin Hooper, could he be limited by the amount of weapons that you see around him? One thing that I told people about this past offseason to be careful about Austin Hooper was, to me, he was signed to his contract because they were using him as an extension of the offensive line. He's a good blocker. The offensive line wasn't great last year. You know you're going to run the football. Bring in a guy at the tight end position that can block, that you can use in running situations, so teams aren't aware of, hey, what are they doing based on where we're at with the tight end position. That's one of the reasons Austin Hooper was such a great addition for them. Even from a fantasy perspective, didn't really do that well. Hayden Hurst, brought him up a second ago as well. What are we going to see from Hayden Hurst? Ended up having 85 targets again. Talked about that. His 56 receptions, his 571 yards. Did end up scoring 6 touchdowns. So that's the good part of this. He ended up scoring 6 touchdowns, which is really kind of saving what was a miserable season compared to what the preseason expectations were. There was several guys that people were high on this year going into the season, like, oh man, this guy is going to bust out. And I was like, I'm not feeling it. He was one of them. So, that was one that ended up holding correctly. He was not used in the same type of situation that Austin Hooper was. Austin Hooper's final year there. Again, one of the reasons that Austin Hooper was so successful his final season in Atlanta was because they didn't have any type of a run game. So they were throwing to Austin Hooper over the middle of the field less than 10 yards. It was really helping his averages carry up because they couldn't run the football. They were using those high percentage completion plays to Austin Hooper to kind of make up for it. At number 15, Dawson Knox. Dawson Knox is a guy that really came on towards the end of the season and in the playoffs. I'm a fan of Dawson Knox, but I didn't know if Dawson Knox was really going to be able to put up that big of numbers, especially with the addition of Stefon Diggs. And for the majority of the season, that was correct. He didn't really do much of anything. And then all of a sudden we get towards the end of the season, and this dude starts to blow up. I mean, and it wasn't even like in terms of yards, it was in terms of touchdowns. The guy ended up scoring towards the end of the season, including the playoffs. From week 12 on, he ended up scoring 5 touchdowns, which again, I say blow up. I'm using that term a little bit loosely here at this point. But he definitely started seeing more and more and more targets after that first part of the season in which he was injured. If you remember, week 5 through week 9, he didn't play at all. Week 9 technically played, didn't have any targets though. He played a very limited number of snaps. And then week 10, he starts to pick up the targets a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. Could we see that this year? Could we see an addition of Dawson Knox to this great passing game? Because you have John Brown, Gabriel Davis, and Stefon Diggs. All 3 of them can take the top off of the defense. You've got Cole Beasley that people are paying attention to as well. That can really leave Dawson Knox in kind of those short to intermediate routes, especially in the red zone, as a great high percentage target for Josh Allen if these other guys are covered up a little bit more often. And number 14, Rob Gronkowski. Again, kind of an up and down year for Rob Gronkowski as well. And here's the thing. That's basically what the tight end position is if you don't own Travis Kelce, Darren Waller, or George Kittle when he's healthy. It's up and down. And that's really what it was for Rob Gronkowski this season. I mean, not a great start to the year. And then we get to week 6, and he scores 4 touchdowns in 5 games. Okay, feeling a little bit better. He has 106 yards in week 12, and then really disappeared after that. From week 14 on, he had 4 weeks of 2 or less targets, with the addition of Antonio Brown. With the chemistry between Mike Evans and Tom Brady building at the end of the season. Gronkowski wasn't that great. And I say the last several weeks of the season, I'm including the playoffs here too. Because again, still relevant, talking about the playoffs a little bit. When you see that from Rob Gronkowski, you think to yourself, what are we going to get in 2021? It could be a thing where, a full year in, another offseason of practice, him getting back into shape. That could be great. He is a free agent. They could say, I don't know if we really want to bring you back or not. I expect him to be back with Tampa Bay, but I expect him to be, again, a guy that's going to be built on scoring touchdowns. He's going to have to score touchdowns to give you value on a weekly basis. Irv Smith Jr., another guy that really started to build up towards the end of the season, and a guy that I really liked, but I didn't know if he would end up being used this year. I was really high on him and Kyle Rudolph, 2 tight end sets, running the ball with Dalvin Cook. You've got a rookie in Justin Jefferson. He's going to have time to adjust. If he doesn't adjust right away, is Adam Thielen going to be as good as he's been in the past with Stefon Diggs? Because without Stefon Diggs on the field, Adam Thielen hasn't been that good. Going to be all these scenarios played out for me with the Vikings over the offseason. And every single scenario to me played out where they would be running more 2 tight end sets with Kyle Rudolph and Irv Smith Jr. That didn't happen. Part of the reason is because they just didn't run 2 more tight end sets. Part of the reason is Justin Jefferson ended up being an absolute stud this season and just took everybody by surprise. Even the people who love Justin Jefferson, nobody expected the type of season they saw from him. And probably part of the reason why Irv Smith Jr. really didn't break out that much. Towards the end of the season, started doing a little bit better. Week 9 on, he had a couple of games where he had 2 touchdowns. He had 5 touchdowns from week 9 till the end of the season. He did deal with a couple of injuries towards the end of the season as well, but you could see towards the end of the year, especially when Kyle Rudolph was hurt, that they were trying to get the ball to Irv Smith Jr. a little bit more. I foresee them getting him even more involved in the passing game this year. Year 3 tends to kind of be that breakout year for tight ends where they've grasped the blocking, the scheme. They've learned to become a complete tight end and do everything within the system that they need to. This could end up being that year for Irv Smith Jr. Logan Thomas, man. How about Logan Thomas? Whew. What a season. And a guy that really was criminally underrated by almost everybody. I mean, he was available on the waiver wire, under 50% owned almost the entire season. He was 3rd at the position in targets. He was 3rd at the position in receptions. Yards weren't as good. He ended up being all the way down at 7th in yards. Did score 6 touchdowns, though. I mean, this is a former college quarterback. He made the transition to tight end earlier in his career, goes to Washington, and all of a sudden this year becomes a great weapon for them. His 7.79 average depth of target, not very big, but that's okay. He was growing. He was becoming better. He was learning. He's still technically kind of learning the position a little bit. He hasn't been playing it that long. If a connection there is between him and whoever is the next quarterback, I think that there's going to be another year where we see some decent numbers out of Logan Thomas. I don't know if we see the same exact numbers because you're not going to have Alex check down Smith looking his way so much. But I think we could see some decent numbers again from him, and he could sneak his way into the top 12 based on volume alone. Evan Ingram. People hate Evan Ingram, and I get it. He hasn't done anything for you since that one big year, right? He's dealt with injuries. Some ineffective play, whatever it may be. But towards the end of the season, I tried to tell all of you one thing. KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Why? Because the tight end position is so difficult for us to predict on a weekly basis if you don't have the top 3 or 4 tight ends. Evan Ingram was still 3rd in the league in targets this year. He was healthy all season, 16 games this season. 3rd in the league in targets. He had, or 4th in the league in targets, He had 102 targets. That right there tells me alone, yeah, the production wasn't there because he only had 650 yards, but they were looking his way. His yards per reception all the way back up over 10 at 10.38, so he was still making some big plays there. His yards after the catch per reception, could have possibly been a little bit better. Doesn't quite reach the Darren Waller, Travis Kelce, but those came out to a 4.51. In the red zone, he saw 17 targets, but he only scored 1 touchdown. That's kind of where we lose it, is because Evan Ingram, even though they were trying to force the ball to him and make him a part of the offensive scheme, which you can tell by the targets, he didn't score. He only scored 1 touchdown all season long. If we can get another 16 games healthy from Evan Ingram, there's no reason why he can't be a top 12 tight end. If he can score 5 touchdowns next year and keep the same numbers he had, I didn't mean top 5 tight end. He could be a top 12 tight end, easy. If he keeps the same amount of production, same target, same reception, same yards, but scores even 5 touchdowns, this is a guy that's going to make it into the top 12 of fantasy tight ends. So I get it. I get people hating on my videos all the time. They're like, Kyle, how can you still love Evan Ingram? I mean, you have a specific player that you like, and it leads us astray. I'm not directly quoting somebody, but you get the picture. But here's the thing with that. I might have a certain type of player. Maybe I've held on to Evan Ingram a little too long. But if the numbers tell me that opportunity is there, I don't want to turn a blind eye to it. Because if I do, and he ends up bouncing back and having a great season, y'all are going to be like, Kyle, why didn't you call Evan Ingram? Like I said, he finished with 109 fantasy points. That was only 10 fantasy points off of being a top 12 tight end. If he had scored, like I said, 5 touchdowns, give me 4 more touchdowns, that would be 24 extra points. That would have put him all the way up above Rob Gronkowski at tight end 8. If the opportunity is there, ladies and gentlemen, he's going to be super cheap. Sometimes you got to follow it, cross your fingers, have a backup plan, and if it hits, congratulations. At number 10, Mike Gaseki. I'm hoping that him and Tua really, really develop next season. Gaseki for me is the definition of the tight end position. I did a lot better job calling Gaseki this year than I did in 2019. In 2019, I told you all time and time again, he is my fantasy kryptonite. I can never seem to get a call right with Mike Gaseki. Yeah, a little bit better of a season this year. A career high in yards, 703 yards. 6 touchdowns, also a career high. So definitely took that next step. But he took a step back in targets, and he only saw 2 more receptions. So the yards per reception took a nice little bump. I mean, he was a guy, his catch percentage, 62.4, a lot better than 2019, but not as good as 2018. He's an athletic freak. So if Miami can get him into the correct positions, if they can grab somebody else this offseason, whether it be free agent, draft, whatever it may be, another weapon on the outside at wide receiver, get themselves a running game that's a little bit more consistent, whether it be one guy or a committee, Mike Gaseki should absolutely thrive and take another step forward in 2021. Dallas Goedert at number 9. This ranking is based off the fact that I still think Philadelphia could make some sort of a move with Zach Ertz. I don't love it. I don't love that. Again, like I said with Zach Ertz, I want him to stay there. I think if they run 2 tight end sets with these two, they're going to be good. The opportunity for Dallas Goedert is there, but he missed a lot of games this year. I mean, he only played in 11 games. He played in 16 and 15 his first 2 years. I mean, his yards were down by about 70 yards from last year, but again, if he plays in those extra games, he probably gets it. 2 less touchdowns in 2019. If he plays in those extra games, he probably gets it. He ended up getting hurt in week 3. He only saw, in week 1 and 2, he saw 9 targets and 8 targets. He gets hurt in week 3 during the game, only sees 1 target. Comes back in week 8, only sees 1 target. To which at that time I said, hold tight on Goddard. Don't go with him yet. Let's get through this week. Let's see the bye week. Let's see what happens when he comes back after the bye in week 10. 6, 10, 7, 6, and 8 targets the rest of the season. Absolutely a guy that they wanted to use in this offense, and a guy to me that is the tight end 1. So even if they do keep Zach Ertz, me personally, I'm still going to rank Dallas Goedert over the top. Okay, over the top of Zach Ertz. Noah Fant at number 8, another guy, had some injury issues. Had to come back from those. Obviously, Drew Lock, his up and down roller coaster of a season, that kind of hurt a little bit as well. The targets are going to be there for Noah Fant, but he's got to turn those targets into bigger games. Getting Courtland Sutton back next year could help with that. If he can keep the same amount of targets, which he saw 93 targets this season, if we can get him right around that 90 target mark, he should go upwards of about 800 yards, because when you've got Courtland Sutton, you got KJ Hamler, you got Jerry Jeudy, you got all these guys, these weapons that can pull people down the field. Noah Fant's going to have room to run everywhere. So even if some of the targets come down a little bit, the efficiency of the targets should go up with Courtland Sutton back. And hopefully either a new QB that's more consistent or Drew Lock taking a step forward next year. Number 7, Robert Tanyan. A guy that, again, wasn't even a tight end at one point in time. He developed into a tight end at the NFL level. Green Bay, they end up bringing him in on the practice squad, and look what he ends up doing this year. In week 1, didn't play a snap. He played 10 snaps on special team in week 1. Week 2 comes around, he scores a touchdown. Week 3 comes around, he scores a touchdown. And all of a sudden, then we get that at-home game. It gets Atlanta, where it's like, oh my God, he's the only receiver available on this team, it seems like. 98 yards and 3 touchdowns. And all of a sudden, Robert Tanyan at that point is like, holy crap, Who is this guy? Where did he come from? Luckily, though, ladies and gentlemen, I like to tell you when I've made some good calls, right? I like to keep you up to date on those. I mean, in week 2, I was telling you to pick up Robert Tanyan. So, hey, if y'all listened, you got onto the Robert Tanyan bandwagon a little bit quicker than everybody else. But he scores those 3 touchdowns, and all of a sudden it's like the guy disappears. 25, 32, 79, 5, and 33 yards. No touchdowns over the next several weeks. Week 11 gets there, and he scores a touchdown in every single week, but week 16 the rest of the way. He ends up catching 11 touchdowns this past season. Even if we can just get him those touchdowns again next year, he's a top 10 tight end easily, even if we can't produce some of the receptions and yards that we would like to see out of a top-tier tight end. At number 6, Hunter Henry. I'm expecting Hunter Henry to stay put. I do not want him to go anywhere. And kind of the same thing about Hunter Henry as Evan Ingram, except Hunter Henry finally towards the end of the season did some things. But I told you all he didn't have any touchdowns there for a while, and I said, look, Hunter Henry's getting the targets, okay? He's top 10, top 5 in targets this far into the season. He's just not scoring touchdowns. If he can start scoring touchdowns, we'll be fine. He ended up scoring 4 touchdowns there towards the back half of the season. Fortunately for Hunter Henry owners, that development with Justin Herbert this year is going to be a big one. That's what we need to see, is another step forward with Justin Herbert. The big playability is there. The red zone ability is there. All of these things are there. Hunter Henry could be a huge, huge weapon in that offense if he stays put. Mark Andrews at number 5. I mean, Mark Andrews, what else can you say about the guy? We know he's going to get targets. Although this year, only 58 targets in 14 games. Part of that contributed to the fact that the passing game was up and down to begin the season. Still goes for 701 yards. Still goes for 7 touchdowns. He's a guy, top 5 tight end potential for me. TJ Hawkinson at number 4. Yeah, he's going to have Jared Goff, a new quarterback, but my hope is that he's got Dan Campbell, a former tight end, a former Lions tight end at that. Hopefully he realizes the damage that TJ Hawkinson can do. He looks at his offensive coordinator and he says, boy, you better get him included in the game plan. It would be a travesty if they don't. George Kittle at number 3, Darren Waller at number 2, Travis Kelce at number 1. Travis Kelce is going to be your number 1 tight end. You've got Darren Waller and George Kittle at 2 and 3. You look at these guys and you could go back and forth. The reason I'm giving Darren Waller the nod right now is just because how incredibly the guy's just incredible. So is George Kittle. But I'll take Derek Carr over potential Jimmy Garoppolo. Now, if they get a new quarterback, maybe that changes a little bit and I switch these two around. But as of right now, I'm going to go with the quarterback that I know for sure is going to end up being there and get Darren Waller the ball just like he did last season. There you have it, Headliner Nation, my top 20 tight ends. Again, don't take anything too seriously this early in the offseason when it comes to rankings. These will be wrong by the beginning of the season. They could be wrong by next week for all I know. Just kind of going through the thought process of where we currently are with some of these players. Do me a favor, if you're new here to the channel, make sure you subscribe, become a part of Headliner Nation today. Leave a comment down below, anybody that you would move around, anything that you would change. And then also, if you appreciate the content, hit that like button. Ladies and gentlemen of Headliner Nation, thanks so much for tuning in. I appreciate y'all. Stay safe, stay healthy. I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.